Good morning. I welcome all of you to today's session at the Astana Economic Forum. I am Patrick Duparc. I'm the Dean of the Nazarbayev University Graduate School of Business. Please give a very warm welcome to our guests, Ha-Young Chan and Jeffrey Sachs. I hope you realize how lucky you are. When I was a young economist, I could only dream of meeting with such illustrious and great thinkers that literally shaped the thinking and policies of our times. We're very privileged today, I think, to have two of the world's leading thinkers in economic policy and economics with us. They have advised governments, presidents, prime ministers, and global organizations, and their ideas have changed the course of history on more than one occasion. At a time that our entire region, not just Kazakhstan, is trying to figure out what the right balance is between government and private enterprise, between tight control and laissez-faire, between open borders and isolationism. We need all the wisdom and insights we can get. So let me very briefly introduce our two guests. Hardly do they need an introduction, but just to refresh your memory. Professor Ha-Young Chan is a South Korean institutional economist specializing in development economics. He currently teaches political economy of development at the University of Cambridge. He's the author of several widely acclaimed policy books, his most notably Kicking Away the Ladder, Development Strategy in a Historical Perspective, really changed the way I think people started thinking in terms of international trade and international development. He has served as a consultant to the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and many more. In his book, Kicking Away the Ladder, Professor Chang argues that all major developed countries use interventionist economic policies in order to get rich and then try to forbid other countries for doing similarly. And we'd come back to that later because that goes into, I think, the center of a very lively debate that's been going on for more than centuries about trade and open borders and free trade. Professor Chang is the winner of the Gunnar Myrdal Prize and the Vasily Leontiev Prize. Both prizes, by the way, have been awarded to people who have later gone on to win the Nobel Prize. Professor Jeffrey Sachs is an American economist and director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, previously at Harvard University. And at Columbia University, he holds the title of university professor. That's the highest rank you can get at any university. He is one of the leading experts on economic development and the fight against poverty. You look at Professor Sachs' bio, and his interests cover really a wide range of topics from economics and politics to sustainable development, climate change, environment, and global health. Professor Sachs is also one of the few people I know that made it in just about 3 years from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. We're very envious of you, Jeffrey. No one of us, or very few of us, have ever accomplished that. He is a professor of sustainable development at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs and professor of health policy and management at Columbia School of Public Health. He's also an advisor to current UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and previously Kofi Annan. Professor Sachs has authored many best-selling books: The End of Poverty, Commonwealth, The Price of Civilization, The Age of Sustainable Development is his latest book. Professor Sachs has received more than 20 honorary degrees and many honors around the world. He's regularly seen on the US TV and international TV. I've seen him often on Morning Joe, Charlie Rose, Tavis Smiley, Bloomberg, etc. He was named one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. By the way, Professor Ha-Young Chan was named one of the top 20 most influential economists in the world as well. So you are very lucky today to have access to two of the brightest minds in economics and public policy in the world, I think. Before opening up questions to our students, I'd like to ask both of you a question, if you allow me. You have very smart, intelligent people in front of you. They will work very hard to achieve academic and professional success. I believe they were very carefully selected because of that. Both of you have had clearly an amazing academic career and accomplished things that few academics or professionals have ever accomplished. That is impact. You know, that what you do really matters. And so one of the things that I would like to know, and I'm sure most of the young people in the audience would like to know, is was there a particular moment or event in your career that shaped your career? And let's say an aha moment. Or was it just hard work and persistence? And a second part of that question is, what would you advise young and ambitious people, especially aspiring economists, to do in the early part of their career? How do you make sure that your work makes a difference? Ha-Young, let's first go to you, if you allow me.
Right. Good morning. I'm very glad to be here, especially to share this podium with Jeff. I grew up reading his stuff from the days of Third World Debt crisis in the early 80s. But I didn't realize he was so young, you know. I mean, he was barely older than me. So I've always thanked him for his various policy work. Well, I think in my case, I wouldn't say there was an aha moment, but what really defined how I do economics was actually a word of advice from my father, who, I mean, was no academic. I mean, he worked in the Korean Ministry of Finance. He was mainly in charge of tax administration. I mean, he did a part-time PhD in economics, but he wasn't really an academic economist. But when I told him that I wanted to study economics, he said, well, you have to realize that academics have their limits. Yeah? So he said, you know, I've commissioned very expensive econometric models estimating, predicting the tax revenue of my country. And these models have invariably performed worse than these sort of semi-educated lower-level bureaucrats sucking their pencils, kind of putting down their guesswork. He said, of course, I mean, these people were not very educated, but they had 30 years of experience under their belt, and do not underestimate those people. So, no, I mean, he wasn't necessarily slagging off econometrics or anything like that, but he basically taught me to have a sense of humility, you know, simply because you know some fancy theory, simply because you can manipulate equations better than some other people doesn't mean that you are right. So I think that's one thing that I have borne in my mind while I was doing research. I think, I mean, on the whole, what is important is sense of purpose. If you, I mean, ask me to name one thing, because, you know, people who have come this far like you know, you are very clever, you know, you will do anything, I mean, if people throw it at you. But, I mean, that's not enough, because if you want to achieve something, I mean, you have to work on, I mean, not necessarily just one thing, but a small number of things persistently, because if you do not really have that focus, you get distracted. You know, the academia goes in fashion, you know. So when I was doing my PhD in the late 1980s, everyone was doing new growth theory. And then by the time all these people came on the market moved on, and, you know, they couldn't find a job because all departments already had people doing new growth theory. And then, you know, this fashion fluctuates. So, I mean, instead of just getting distracted by whatever is happening around you, I think you need a very clear sense of purpose and focus. And yeah, I mean, for a long stretch of your career, you might be working on something that is not very fashionable, but, you know, 10 years later, it will come in fashion, and you'll be one of the world leading experts. So, yeah, that's slightly exaggerating, but yeah, I think I mean also that in the long run, it's academic life is very kind of isolating, lonely. I mean, if you are working in a company, in government, you work with other people. There are situations, yeah, that you have to deal with them. If you are sitting in your the office doing your research, I mean, you can very easily lose momentum. And if you are not really passionate about what you are doing, if you are doing something simply because it's fashionable, then you will lose interest, and in the long run, you really cannot achieve very much. So, I mean, that would be my suggestion.
Jeffrey, how did you tumble into the dismal science?
Also, thank you. It's a great pleasure also to be with Hajung and all of you. I think for me, the good opportunity to see other places in the world from your own home is something, if you have the opportunity, take it, because it's really important to get perspective. And the challenges in your own country can be very dramatic and important, and you'll gain an understanding by looking at the situation from a different angle. And so I would say my own life-shaping experiences as an economist came from the good luck and opportunity to be able to see different places in the world and think about what I was seeing. And I've been thinking about that for 44 years now. 44 years ago, I went to visit a pen pal who was a young person. In those days, you didn't have email pen pals. You wrote letters, and then every few weeks a letter came back. And I had a pen pal when I was in high school who lived in East Berlin when there was still the division between East and West Germany, and there was still the Iron Curtain. And we wrote to each other. And then after high school, I went to visit him and spent a couple of weeks. And all the time he told me about how wonderful the socialist economy was. And I was a high school student, and I realized, first, I didn't know very much. Second, I was very interested in what he was saying. So I decided I would go back after, it was the summer between high school and university, that I would study these questions. And we were also assigned a book to read, several books actually, for our first week of university. I was a student at Harvard College, and there were introductory lectures that leading professors gave for the first week of school. And they told us over the summer before coming to college, read the following books. So one of the books that I was asked to read that same summer was a famous book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy by Joseph Schumpeter. And so I read that. Well, I went to East Germany. And by the way, in those days, you had to convert a certain amount of hard currency into the East German marks. And then you could only use that in special stores. So in the last day of my visit, since I had stayed with the family, there was not very much to spend on. So I had the money still in my wallet, and we went to the store. And I didn't want tourist items because I was backpacking in Europe, so I couldn't really carry anything. The only thing that was there that I might be interested in were books. And the only books there were books by Karl Marx or about Karl Marx. So that was also my introduction, because I can assure you in America I never was assigned a book about Karl Marx in high school. So the rest of the summer I read two books, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy by Joseph Schumpeter, and a book called Introduction to Dialectical and Historical Materialism. Okay, by the end of the summer I was completely confused. And I've spent 44 years trying to get unconfused. So that was how I got into economics. And I really liked that because I got into it because I was interested in the subject. I was interested in trying to understand how the world works, which I think is a good way to get interested in something, that you're interested in a puzzle. And I've been interested in the same question for 44 years, which is what makes for a good society? And then I kept adding questions onto that. Why are some places rich and others poor? What makes people happy? What can we do in our collective actions through public policy to improve well-being? And I'll mention just one more example. I became a student of economics. That was 1972. And then in 1976, I went back to visit my pen pal, and I knew a little bit more than I did before. And then I went to graduate school, and I got my PhD and became a professor and wrote a lot of papers, a lot of mathematical models, and became a tenured professor. And then in 1985, a former student asked me to come to his country, Bolivia, to work on a problem, which was the problem of hyperinflation. And I remember that day to this moment, because that was 31 years ago. I got off the plane, took a deep breath, and by the way, Bolivia, the capital, is about 4,000 meters above sea level. So when you take a deep breath, there was nothing that came into your lungs. And you said, whoa, this is different. And then I started to work that evening on this problem of hyperinflation, and I realized, my God, this is really a different place. Just again, the same like in East Berlin. And I said, what's going on here? And I said, you know, I'm trained for certain things because I understand monetary economics to some extent, which works at 4,000 meters above sea level. But I don't really understand a lot of what I'm seeing. I didn't study history. I didn't study the sociology. I don't really know the local scene. I don't really understand the local politics. I don't understand what the people who I'm meeting are telling me about the politics here. And so I realized, boy, that's a lot of ignorance. And I'm here as an expert. So that was, again, 31 years ago. And I always feel like that. Every morning, what can I learn so I'm not so stupid today? Because there's so much to understand to fit the pieces together of a really complex puzzle, which is how the world works. So it's also a lot of learning every single day. But I think that that's really, really fun. And now it's a lot more fun. You can spend a lot of money very fast downloading ebooks every day, which I do. So I carry my library with me on my iPad. It's got thousands of books on it. And this morning I downloaded 2 more books by Al-Farabi, your great philosopher, who is one of the greatest thinkers of history, one of the most influential thinkers. But I haven't studied him enough, and now I'm here. And I have to read Al-Farabi on the plane this evening. So that's my plan for later in the day.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey and Ha-Jung. This is wonderful because not everyone thinks not everyone starts their life and their career with a set plan. There are many different things that make you end up where you are. But if you work hard, you keep studying, you keep being excited about the challenges of the day, you're going to make a difference. You're going to make an impact. I think it's time now to go to some questions of you, because it's about you and your questions. Please, when you have a question, first introduce yourself, where are you from, and then go with a question. Who is going to go first? All right, please go ahead.
Hello, I am Ivan Butkeev, student of Kazakh German University. I am from Almaty. It's a big pleasure to see and hear you. Thank you for this opportunity. My question is about global economy. In my opinion, today's world repeats the scenario of the Great Depression, which was a crisis of overproduction. Oil falls in price, oil storage tanks in the US are overcrowded, and demand for oil is lower than its supply. Despite this, OPEC countries don't want to reduce the production volume. I think that it could lead to big problems. What are your predictions? Thank you.
Who wants to take that first? Basically, they want to know what the price of oil is going to be next week. Want to take that?
Yeah, maybe I'll say a word about that. I think the most interesting issue about oil now is the changing nature of energy use in the world. And while there are many things that are happening in the oil markets and short-term phenomena like the hydrofracking in the US, which has made some difference in US production, or maybe Iran's production coming back online, or maybe the interaction of the financial markets and the oil sector. To my mind, the most interesting question is the future role of oil. And the reason that that's so interesting is that because of climate change, the whole question of what kind of energy we're going to use in the future is now a matter of global choice and debate. So we're not only talking about how the oil market works, we're really talking about the future of the world energy system. This by itself is quite unusual because something so fundamental in the world economy as energy isn't usually a matter of conscious choice. It's usually a matter of technological evolution and market phenomena and millions and billions of individual decisions. But in this moment that we're in history, governments last year in Paris said, we're going to move to a different kind of energy system because when we use coal, oil, and gas, we're creating human-made global warming, and this is dangerous. And so for the first time in history, there's a conscious decision, whether it will be honored or not is a question, but a conscious decision to shift our whole energy system to low carbon energy, meaning renewable energy like wind and solar power, or hydropower, or geothermal energy, or nuclear energy, or other technologies that don't emit carbon dioxide when you burn them, which is what fossil fuels, of course, do. This, I think, is already having a big effect on the oil markets today because the new additions to capacity in energy are more and more coming from non-fossil fuel-based energy sources, especially in power generation. And there's a future perspective now which the oil companies need to keep in mind, which is if they hold their oil, it's likely to be unusable in the future because it won't be allowed to be used. So we use the term stranded, that this oil is going to be stranded in the future. And even Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest reserve holdings in the world, realizes, aha, if we just hold the oil under the ground, maybe we'll never be able to use it. And so they're not ready to hold it back. And the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said last month, we are addicted to oil, we need to do something else. So I mention this because it's a big, complicated issue, one of the most important public policy issues in the world. The future is, as always, quite uncertain about how things will evolve, but this is a very big deal for Kazakhstan because Kazakhstan is a major oil country, a hydrocarbon country. In fact, the economy right now depends heavily on uh, fossil fuels, especially gas and oil. And the future is not very clear, but I would say don't rely on hydrocarbons for the future because it's likely to turn into a bad opportunity. And this poses some very big questions for economic strategy for this country. How to anticipate the future development of energy, how to anticipate the future returns on investment in oil and gas, which has been the mainstay of this economy for the past generation, how to deploy alternative energy in this country because there's a lot of wind potential, there's a lot of solar potential, this is a vast land area, and so there are big, big questions that come from what you're asking. And if you ask someone in the oil industry, they'll give you a pretty short-term answer, perhaps. If you ask someone in the financial markets, they'll say, well, I think by 2 years from now, oil will recover to $80 a barrel. This is a transitory phenomenon. But in order to get the right answer, you need to take the big picture. But the big picture is quite complicated. So to understand the big picture, you need to spend the next 44 years understanding it.
This is very interesting because it's not only a matter of public policy, but also of technology and disruption, and also really of global fairness. And I think it very much touches upon some of your work, Hajun, isn't it?
Yes, I think, no, I mean, Jeff has given the perfect answer, so I don't have much to add to that. But yes, I mean, I think there's the understandable concern among poorer countries that, you know, the rich countries, you guys have pumped in all this carbon dioxide into atmosphere, and now you say we cannot industrialize because the world doesn't have the capacity to accommodate more production. So I think this is a very serious issue. Of course, the rich countries say, well, I mean, that is our great-great-grandfathers who did that. It's not us. And when they did it, they didn't know. So I mean, it's not a straightforward good and evil story, but there is a serious concern, and I think the pressures building upon the rich countries to invest more in kind of affordable renewable energy for the developing countries. Because developing countries, most of them don't have the capacity to innovate in the new energy technologies. So I think that's another added dimension that will push things in the direction that Jeff was talking about. I mean, of course, everything in economics goes up and down, but it's on a kind of downward slope here. So you need to think about what Kazakhstan will be producing and exporting in 20, 30, 40 years' time, instead of worrying about what's the oil price going to be in 18 months' time.
It's also an opportunity, isn't it? While large industrialized economies are heavily invested, often in carbon-based industries, emerging markets could potentially leapfrog and immediately go forward to more sustainable forms of energy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's already happening. China's now ahead in solar panel technology, ahead of countries like South Korea. And in terms of general level of technology, China is still 20, 30 years behind. But in solar panel, they have leapfrog over South Korea, and a lot of other developing countries could be doing that.
Very good. Very interesting debate. I mean, this could, be a topic of an entire conference, really, and it should be. But let's go to the next question. Who will take the next question, please?
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Art, Professor Sachs. 안녕하십니까?
Oh.
장 교수님.
아이고, 한국말 하시네.
I'm a student of Sogang University in Seoul. That's why I speak a bit Korean.
Yeah, very good.
Recently, last year in August, I had a chance to attend the Harvard conference in Manila, H-Fair. So we was discussing the issue regarding green growth strategy. It was very interesting because I'm studying in South Korea. There was a case study about green growth strategy by South Korea that Lee
Yes, the interesting thing about South Korea's green growth strategies, Mr. Lee, wasn't, a very kind of environmentally conscientious person. He's a very straightforward businessman. But, he was at least smart enough to know that in the long run, this could be a very good business opportunity. So he, went into it in a major way. I think the current government has held back on this quite a bit because of the general global downturn and difficulties that South Korea is experiencing these days with Chinese competition and so on. But no, I think that you have to kind of sell this idea of green growth in whatever way we can, because it's a matter of literally life and death for many people. So yes, when you try to persuade business people of the need for green growth, you have to convince them this is maybe not in the short run, but in the long run, a very good business proposition. When you are trying to persuade individuals, you have to tell them that actually, a different energy system and different way of the organizing transport and so on actually could be much better for you because, for example, if you have a good public transport system like in, say, Switzerland or Austria, people don't use cars. They may own a car, but they don't use it because public transport is so convenient. If you have a poor public transport system, what do you do? People have to use that. So you have to persuade people that, going for lower emission lifestyle is actually, maybe in the short run a bit difficult to adjust to, but a greater benefit to them. So I think that you have to kind of persuade different people with different ideas. But yeah, I think that you made a good point about, oil price falling and the pressure for renewable energy easing, and maybe people will say, well, that maybe we wouldn't invest in it. Well, there's a hard economic reality there. A lot of people have to make money, and they wouldn't do something that unless they have to. But that's where the public policy should come in, because we have to make it sure that yes, that along the cycle you might reduce investment a little bit, but basically the public policy has to be there through regulation, maybe subsidies, to make it sure that we are making good progress towards building green the energy system. Otherwise, you relax for a few years because oil price is low, and then the progress is set back that much.
Jeffrey, the expo that's going to be held here next year is built around sustainable growth and sustainable energy. Is sustainable growth good public policy?
Well, it's the only viable public policy because unsustainable growth means that we're building up crises in the future that would be very serious. And a lot of the question and discussion is really about short-term and long-term and the capacity to think ahead, which is not an easy capacity either at an individual level or at a social level. So the basic idea of delayed gratification is really a very fundamental part of good personal management and good societal management. Many studies have been done by psychologists looking at how 4-year-olds either can or do not delay their gratification, the so-called marshmallow test, it's called, which is if a 4-year-old is able to not take a marshmallow to eat because they're told if you wait, you get 2 of them, that's a good predictor of how that 4-year-old will do as an adult, it turns out. Well, the same is true in society. If you always grab the short-term opportunity, that doesn't add up to the long-run result. And ironically, my favorite economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, made a famous quip that in the long run we're all dead. And he was trying to point out the urgency of addressing the Great Depression. But the quip has made a lot of mischief in the end, because it's not true in the long run we're all dead. In the long run, there is society which is depending on what the short run did. And thinking always to abide by the short term became a kind of mistake of Keynesian economics, the lesser followers of this great economist, because Keynes himself was always thinking about the long term. But this is a good example. In the short run, maybe it pays to go on burning coal or doing something else. But in the long run, those who have thought ahead and realize that we actually can't continue in this particular direction will be better placed, which is what how June was just saying about Korea, which is always thinking ahead as a society. What's the next technology? How do we pick up the next wave of technology? That's a good strategy for economic development. It's also a good strategy for real value investing, because if you think about the long term in this debate whether to divest from fossil fuels or not, you realize that the fossil fuel industry has a serious problem. And therefore, a good long-term investor will be thinking hard about that as well. And for the expo, but I should just add one more piece to this discussion. Thinking about the long term is hard. It's a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of collective action problems. There are a lot of strategic issues. And the long term always involves the question of technological change, because over a period of 20 or 40 years, you're thinking about a different kind of economy because of technological evolution. And every issue about technological change is interesting, because it's a very complex question, and it's a complex public policy question as well. The technologies we need for the green economy don't quite exist yet right now, not in the way we want them to exist. And how to bring about the kind of performance of technology that we will need is a complicated question of profit motive and public policy. And so it raises a lot of very interesting questions. What should be done to make a green economy? Is that just a market mechanism? Well, probably not, because the market doesn't give the right signals. Is it just a matter of making the signals better by adding a, quote, price of carbon, which is one constant proposal? Well, that could correct certain kinds of incentives, but probably not other kinds of incentives. For example, the incentives on how to invest in future technology. Almost any subject should be pretty complicated by the time you're done with it. Oversimplification of a complex system is a big mistake. Of course, getting lost in the complexity and saying we can't see any answers because it's too complicated is the error on the other side. So finding a way to understand complexity and respect complexity is a big part of good economics in general. You can't drown in complexity because you get paralyzed by saying, my God, everything's possible. I have no idea what to do. On the other hand, if you oversimplify, you miss the richness of the topic. That's what makes economics fun, I think, is operating on this critical boundary between having insights that are useful, but not oversimplifying a complicated story.
This is so important, the discussion about short-term and long-term, especially here and in many countries like Kazakhstan, because this is a country that is still building an infrastructure and where it wants to go in the future. And so what we decide now is going to have a very clear impact on the future. It may be true in industrialized nations as well, but there is a lot more in place, and change may be much slower there than here, where we really build from scratch in many different ways. Let's go to the next question. All right.
Where are the women?
Well,
We need a woman to ask the next question. Sorry, you come afterwards.
Thank you. My name is Skakova Dianira. I'm master student of Shakarim Simei State University, and I want to address my question to Jeffrey Sachs. Yesterday, you talked about opportunity to Kazakhstan integrate to China economy. And do you accept a situation, as we know that integration is a mutual process? Do you accept opportunity that China, as a huge and powerful neighbor, could just absorb our economy and destroy our business sector? And what you will suggest to our government, to our business sector to avoid this situation? Thank you.
Yeah. My own understanding of economics is that any economy, whether it's a country or a city or a region, finds its place as part of a larger world system. And how that works changes in history because the means of integration, which include trade, transport, movement of people, movement of ideas, movement of finance, are themselves dependent on the key technologies of integration. Are people walking? Are they riding horses? Are they on internet? So throughout history, what economic integration means changes. But I don't believe in history it's ever really been true in the last 3,000 years that economic isolation defines the patterns of development. And the basic reason I think that that's the case is that when we want economic improvement of our living conditions, better health, better productivity, that depends on our knowledge and tools, our technology. But almost always in history, the technologies are a world phenomenon, not a local phenomenon. So the things that make it possible for human betterment are part of a world system, not a local system. Because no country, no society has invented everything that is needed for well-being. China thought that it had 600 years ago, and it closed its borders, and Adam Smith said something very smart in 1776. He said in The Wealth of Nations that China lives at the maximum level as a sophisticated society at the maximum of its way of life, its constitution, he said. But it's also at a limit because of its closed nature. And China found that out at the very hard way by the 19th century when the European powers were so much more powerful that they could really beat up China for 100 years. So I believe in the open view as quite a fundamental issue. So I don't think Kazakhstan has a choice of whether to close or to open. Now, having said that, this raises a lot of questions. Hajung has written beautifully about many of them. How do you learn from others? How do you develop using technologies? How do you protect your civilizational values or culture, especially as a small country? And you have a society, you have traditions and so forth. You have a very big neighbor. Living next to a big neighbor is never so simple. We have a comedian in the United States, Woody Allen. I don't know if you know him, but he said, can the lion and the lamb sleep next to each other? It's a biblical question. And he said, yes, the lion and the lamb can sleep next to each other, but the lamb does not get much rest. I don't think you could be very complacent next to China ever because China's so vast. It's a vast civilization, and it can absorb a lot in ways that the next door neighbor doesn't find very comfortable. That's also true of America. You know, the United States is not such a friendly neighbor often. It's invaded its neighborhood many, many times. In fact, the US projects so much power that it invades many other countries as well. So power is definitely a dangerous phenomenon in the world, and I wouldn't minimize it. All of this means, I keep coming back to complexity. Kazakhstan needs to be open. It needs to be part of a China economic range, because China really is going to have a huge role to play in the world economy. But on the other hand, it has to protect its own civilizational values and society, because that's what makes life worth living, is being part of a culture, part of a society. And interestingly, despite a globalization now that's very intense, the tribal instinct, being Kazakh, or being Uyghur, or being 1,000 other ethnic groups is very powerful. Being Scottish, you know, 300 years after the union of Scotland and England, the Scots are saying, we want to go on our own, or at least half of them saying that, or the Catalans saying, we don't want to be part of Spain. Are you kidding? You've been part of Spain for hundreds of years. No, we want to be Catalan. And so this is a very deep phenomenon. I respect it a lot, but it cannot mean isolation. Isolation is surely the biggest way to get taken over, because you become weak, you become lost, and you become very vulnerable. So I do believe that what China is discussing these years of the One Belt, One Road, which means the overland connections, confusingly, that's the belt, confusing us for us in English, and the road is actually the maritime link, which is not how we would think about it. So there's something in the Chinese that I don't understand. But in any event, those two linkages linking Western Eurasia, which we call Europe, and Eastern Eurasia, which we call China, or East Asia, that's a very deep phenomenon. That's been going on for about 3,000 or 4,000 years at least. But it's very intense right now, and it is a key part of development. I find it very interesting, and I'll just end here with this remark. The Silk Road was the great highway of the world of Eurasia for about 2,000 years. And it was the best technology in the world. The horse, what a wonderful technology, because you could go fast, you could go far, and it was the powerful transport means for world history for 2,000 years. And this region made the best horses in the world. So you were the General Motors, Toyota, Hyundai of the world for 2,000 years, because you made the best vehicle in the whole world. And that was good for the Mongol conquest, the Huns, and so forth, because you had the best cars in the world, four-wheel vehicles, four-footed vehicles. Now, things have changed. And for a while, being a Central Asian hub of horsemanship wasn't so useful after 1498 and then after the internal combustion engine. But the Silk Road's back, because overland, rapid rail, passenger travel, fiber connectivity, and China's rise paired with a strong European economy means that this corridor of Eurasia is going to be a dominant economic corridor of the 21st century. Kazakhstan's right in the middle of it. And so that's a good place to be. Be careful, but be part of it. and definitely make a financial market for Central Asia, the Astana financial market, and take advantage of this geographic reality, because part of economic strategy is always thinking about geography. Where do I fit in? And given today's and the future technology, what is our role in the world? But keep one eye open as you sleep.
Fascinating. Hajun, was that we're almost at the end, but was that ever a consideration in South Korea, how integrated with the rest of the world, or how isolated South Korea should be?
Yeah, well, Korea has had very difficult relationships with the outside world because, we were the small boy in a neighborhood dominated by big boys, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mongols, everyone beat us, I think on average we were invaded like 1.5 times every 2 years in our history. So, yeah, so we have very complicated relationship with the rest of the world, and one manifestation of this is North Korea, the most isolated country in the world. I mean, South Koreans had a slightly different view. I mean, we were very wary of the outsiders, but we decided that we cannot afford to be isolated. So we fully integrated with the rest of the world, but in a very kind of measured, gradual way. So we didn't open up from day one. I mean, we protected certain things, raised capabilities in those things, and then let those things go out in the big world. So yes, there were a lot of protectionism, but this was protection to eventually join the rest of the world. So basically, when Hyundai, the Korean motor car company, first started this production, joint venture with Ford at the time in the 1960s, they produced 6 cars a year. I mean, it was a glorified mechanic shop. But then so it had to be very heavily protected. But they had a plan. I mean, they didn't want to stay inside all the time. They had this plan to eventually export and become a world player. But they knew that in the first 10, 20 years, they needed the protection to build up the capability. But the eventual goal was always to join the rest of the world. So I think that's probably the wisest way to approach this issue of integration. Because if you want to be a player in the world economy, you have to be good, and becoming good takes time. So use the protection and other measures to create a space where you can build your capabilities, but always with the aim to join the rest of the world. So you have to always, in the long run, aim for the top slot, invest in building capabilities and growing your producers. And I think this kind of measured global integration is not easy, because there's always pressure to open up or completely close down, but I think that's the best way to go about it.
A fascinating discussion, and really the most important questions of our times, I think. I really want to thank you, Jeffrey.
So I want to apologize to...
Really sorry, we ran out of time, but this is something that you can debate for a long time. These are the important questions. So, Jeffrey, Hajun, I really want to thank you for your time and your insights. Enjoy the few more days that you'll be in Kazakhstan and in Astana, and please come back to share some of your wisdom and insights with us.
And good luck to all of you.
Thank you.